Welcome to CEO Secrets. I'm here today with Vinny Ribas, as always, every Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. Pacific. Welcome. I hope you have your cup of coffee. I see you've got yours, Vinny. I've got mine over here. We are ready to go for another great show today. So what's your take this week? Where are we at this week in the world?
Oh, gosh, that's a scary question.
Of course.
I think in the world, we are finding that there are a lot of people who are not following our principles, and they need to learn.
You heard it here first.
Especially today's.
Absolutely. And I have to agree. I think there's a number of conversations I've been in this week where I'm actually seeing a shift. Let me say it this way. I'm seeing a shift from people in some businesses. I think that the owners and the CEOs have reached a level of acceptance with where things are at and recognition that we are not going back to what was, let's say, someone said, use the date of March 1st. Like, we're never going back to March 1st again. And I've seen several CEOs and business owners essentially, not say it, but essentially in their actions start portraying that's their mindset. And they're starting to think about, how do we do business going forward, not just for the next several months, 6 months or something like that, but going forward, how do we restructure our business? And so it's interesting because the four principles we've talked about already for the brilliant business owner very much play out in this. And I think today's principle number 5 here, is going to be perfect for the timing that I've just described, where these business owners are starting to really embrace the reality and look for the next path that they have to go on. So, Vinny, unless you've got more to add to that, why don't you introduce us to this week's principle?
Well, the principle itself is, I take responsibility for the outcomes and the effects of the system. So the system is your business and the way it operates. It's not your physical business. We won't go back over all the things that we've talked about in the first 4 principles. But the idea behind this is that if you're not taking responsibility for the good and the bad, you take credit for the good, you take responsibility for the bad, at least as far as how you're going to react to it and how you're going to go forward. And that's exactly what you were talking about. The business owners, the CEOs who are going to be successful are the ones that are looking at a very challenging situation, but looking at it from a realistic perspective and saying, we cannot maintain the status quo. We've got to do something different. And they're looking for those solutions. And, you may think, okay, the world is going to return. The virus will go away if we get that's all fine and well and good. It's going to happen. But people's fears, the way people do business, all of these things have changed dramatically. Just because the virus is gone, are people still going to be willing to go to a large concert or to a nightclub or to a restaurant? Or
to a mall, to a retail store.
Absolutely. So a lot of things are going to be mental. There's going to be mental shifts. There are mental shifts in the way the public are doing business. A lot more shopping online. And there's no reason for that to not continue. A lot of companies have sent their employees home to work and are deciding, you know what? You're fine there. We're getting business done and you're doing what you need to do. Will it maintain itself? Will people get lazy? I don't know. But I'm going to try it. I'm giving myself more time to work at home and less time to have to come into the office. But I'm responsible for that decision, and I'm responsible for what the outcome of that decision is. And that's what separates the real business owners, the real CEOs, the successful ones, from the ones who play the victim role and are just going to say, well, excuse me, I have no control over the virus. I can't control how people think. I can't control what people do. I can't change my business on a dime. There can be some of it's realistic. You can't control the virus. You can't control what people are going to do. You can control your reaction. You can control how you adjust your business model, your attitude, the way your employees are working, the way your employees are thinking. You can control, you have to control all of those things if you're going to be successful.
And I would say, actually, I think your points are right on target there. Uh, you've got to control your reaction to the situation. And I think kind of where I'm seeing things going is now it's moving away from just reaction. There are some of those CEOs and business owners out there that in the last few weeks are now being proactive. They're actually saying, okay, we've been reactive long enough. We can no longer just be reactive. I can't cut expenses any more than I have. I've got to get back into the business world and figure out, how do I help my customers solve problems in their lives or in their businesses, whether it's B2C or B2B. And so there's it's no longer about reaction. It's now about proactivity. And I think that's a really key point, because when people take responsibility for reaction, and react properly, they stabilize the situation. They defend where they are. Proactivity and taking responsibility for proactivity is about going out there and growing the business again, scaling the business again. Now, that might mean you have to reclaim territory you had before. It might mean you have to reclaim customers who abandon you for a period of time, or find new customers. But it's the proactivity that you've got to start taking responsibility for in today's world where we are now. And I was in a deep conversation with some brilliant business partners that I have. And well, no, it wasn't you, Vinny. I mean, you're brilliant as well. But we were talking yesterday, and we were talking about how the very ecosystem of business has changed. And if you look at it as an example, e-commerce has been out there, right? But it was only a portion. It wasn't even 50% of how retail sales are being made. It was only a tiny fraction of how restaurants were making their sales. And you go through industry by industry. It was only a fraction of it, but it suddenly became, for a period of time, the only way they could do business. And now a lot of retail stores are open to some extent. A lot of restaurants are open to some extent, but they can't go back to the proportions they were before because of regulation. On top of that, they're not going to go back to the way they were before because people have changed their expectations. People have different needs, and it might be out of fear of going out, but it's also about, you know what? I didn't realize how easy it really is to order my groceries online and not have to walk through the freaking store and pick things up. I mean, that's just one example that one person threw out there. I was hesitant. Exactly. They resisted, and now they're out there. They're like, I don't think I'm ever going to go back to a grocery store. There's no point in it to me. And so if you start thinking about that, it's going to shift the world even further, because at that point, do you need to have the retail grocery outlets like we have today, where they're designed for people to have experiences? Or do you shift to warehouse environments for the most part? Anyway, we can expound upon that if we want to, but the point is, there's the responsibility of reactivity, which we've been through, and now we're in a phase of responsibility for proactivity, because the outcome was to save the business so it didn't fail. Now the outcome has to be to scale the business, either to regrow or to grow it further, because there are businesses that are doing very well right now, and actually there are businesses in very scary situations because they're doing so well. Think of the logistics industry, UPS, FedEx, all the third-party logistics. They're doing so much more commerce than they did in the past. In some regards, think about, look where they are now, the amount of e-commerce we're doing. And then you throw Christmas on top of that, which is coming. The Christmas season is coming. How in the world are they going to be able to scale to that capacity? So this is a time for proactivity now. How do we scale our businesses back up? And there's some markers on the stock markets showing that, hey, we might be back on a growth path. It's not that the recession is over. I don't want to imply that at all, but there are indicators that maybe we can start down a growth path. Maybe we can start looking at scaling back up, but it's going to take us time to get back to where we were before.
Absolutely. But I do want to stress that this is not just about this whole virus situation. This is in your business, whether your key employee quits, or you have a fire, or a competitor opens up across the street. I mean, there's so many different things. I love in our notes we wrote down, and I'm going to read this because I don't want to say it wrong. Success is never the result of perfect planning and execution. The concept can't exist because life and business are too unpredictable. Instead, success is the result of perfect or positive reactions to adversities along the journey.
That I'm glad you read that, because we wrote that, what, 5 years ago? And so it was not in response to COVID or anything that we're experiencing today or the new technology that's out there. It's a reality of life. It's a reality of being in business. There's always going to be unpredictable adversities that you have to react, and you have to be reactive to and proactive to.
Absolutely. And I think we're talking about big things. We're talking about little things. It could be something small. I mean, it could be the way a customer complains about something. That's an adversity that could affect a lot of things. I mean, they could go around and put it on social media. There are lots of businesses that are afraid of their customers because of that. Or, people are lawsuit friendly and everything now. So there are concerns that weren't there 20 years ago. You have to be not only aware of everything, but you have to be proactively not just dealing with them, but preventing them, putting the things in place that will help stop those things to happen. And then, when they do happen, you have to be the face of your company. You have to be the one who at least says, I am the take charge person from here, and I'm going to make things happen. We're going to make this right. We're going to make this work. Is it possible every single time? No. There are businesses that are failing because of COVID right now. They're going out of business. We're not trying to make light of that. We're not saying the CEOs didn't do everything they possibly could. I mean, there are times when it's just beyond your control. But there are times when it is.
To your point, Vinny, sorry to interrupt here, but to your point earlier, we see businesses go out of business every year, probably every day of the year, outside of COVID. So we may see an acceleration. We may see this as the catalyst, but fundamentally, it means that they were not designed to withstand this type of adversity. And can you know every adversity that's going to hit you? Absolutely not. Can you build resilience in around most of them? Yes, you can. But a lot of companies were built in the good times that we've been riding on for several years now, and not really built for resilience in the challenging times, in the adverse times. And so again, that's not to say, to shame them or to guilt them or anything else. It's just it's a reality. It's a fact of life. They were potentially scaling so fast or doing so well that they really couldn't see the boulders that were hidden below the surface. That once the level of the lake, drops, the danger that is all around them.
You're absolutely right. And so we don't want to make light of anybody's challenges whatsoever. But the whole point behind this is when it does happen, somebody has to take responsibility. And what happens in a lot of places is a lot of business owners, CEOs start the blame game. It's their fault, his fault, her fault. We couldn't do anything about the virus. I mean, there's so many different things that you can list that you don't have control over. And that is probably true in a lot of cases. You didn't start the fire. That's the thing that most people say, I didn't start the fire. But somebody has to take the reins. Somebody has to say, I must not have trained, or maybe that employee wasn't trained well enough, or maybe they have a challenge beyond what we were able to see, emotional challenge. I don't know. It depends on the situation. But somebody has to be the face of the company. If the press wants to interview somebody, who's that going to be? Are you going to hide behind your vice president or your, one of your employees and tell them, you go out and talk to them. I don't want to talk to them. You get no respect out of that. And I think, there's a big part of this that is about saving your business or protecting your business or maintaining the integrity of your business, maintaining your reputation. There's so much beyond just are we going to make it through the day and have enough money at the end of the day? There's all of these other peripherals that come into play with this. When people look up to the company and something is challenging, they need to have someone that they can ask questions of, someone who's going to address the problems and say, I'm sorry, we goofed, which happens. I'm sorry, we did it wrong. We were not prepared for that, but this is how we're going to move forward. And we all know of people, business owners, whatever, that refuse to take any responsibility for anything that happens. And it's just, they lose the respect, they lose their power of influence, they lose their attractiveness. I mean, you can have a business that goes through a problem, and it could be a major problem, but the CEO is actually respected for the way they dealt with it.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the things to consider too is that when you have a CEO or a business owner who's taking responsibility for the outcomes and for the effects, positive and negative, they do it in a way that if they're doing it right, let's say it that way, doing it like a brilliant business owner, they're taking responsibility because when something goes wrong, I'm the person that fundamentally has to make it right, has to answer, has to make the final decision on it. Maybe my employees have tried and they haven't solved the problem, so I have to be the last resort. But on the positive side, they can also take responsibility for the success of the company. However, they have to share that success around, right? And so there's this balance of, taking responsibility does not mean taking credit. Right? You can take responsibility for a problem and recognize that problem was caused because someone wasn't trained, someone didn't have the right tools or systems. And so you have to now take the responsibility as a CEO or business owner to say, okay, what are we going to do to fix this in the future so it never happens again? What are we going to do for this particular customer so that they feel like they've been made whole? How are we going to resolve this issue? And so you may not do the work of solving the problem, but you have the responsibility to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that's a challenging environment to be, because a lot of times with CEOs, they have that responsibility, but they may not have the skills. We've talked about this in the past, especially. You may not have the skills to do it all yourself. So you have to build an environment. We call this, we have a whole principle around this later we're going to talk about, but we talk about creating this virtuous environment. And the virtuous environment basically means that your employees, your customers, your advisors, investors, vendors, everyone that's in this system helping you create value, that all of them feel as if they're being uplifted, increased, made better by being part of that system. They love doing business. It doesn't mean it's always perfect, but they love doing business or being in business with you. And I think that's something that if CEOs and business owners can strive for. It's not a people-pleasing element here, but it's about doing what's right, taking responsibility, going for the outcomes, keeping the business on course, and in the process, helping everyone that's going through the business with them.
Absolutely. So it's the whole, the buck stops here. I'm not going to play the blame game and blame everybody else and play the victim role. And that's what your customers admire, and it's one of the reasons they will stay with you. It's what your employees admire. If you're always blaming them for everything that goes wrong and you never take responsibility for, I guess we didn't train you well enough and we need to put something in place, you lose the respect of your employees, and you no longer have a virtuous environment. And the virtuous environment is for the employees, it's for the customers, it's for your vendors, it's for everybody that you're involved with, it's for your community, everything. And we'll go into more detail when we get to that principle. But if you're not creating that, then you lose the respect, you lose confidence. People don't have confidence in you.
You lose trust. People stop trusting you, customers, trust. Your vendors, exactly.
They don't feel like they can come and tell you about something that's wrong, so you lose sight of everything that's going on. You don't have you have to look at, when there's a challenge, you have to look at the minute details of why these challenges happen, but you also have to look at it from the 30,000-foot view and say, what are the ramifications of this? What are the bigger pictures, problems that led to that? You have to have that kind of a view of your business, and then nobody can fix it. You can assign people to do things, but the responsibility has to be yours. You cannot just pass it on to somebody else. It's going to fail miserably, because no one's going to trust you when they're not going to trust that you can pull out of the next adversity, or that you're getting ready for the next one. If you're just blaming everybody, it's everybody else's fault. You're not being proactive in trying to protect them and prevent other adversities. Or they don't feel like you're going to defend them or stand up for them when there is a challenge.
I think beyond just looking at the break fix or fix break mentality, I always say it backwards, the fix break mentality, you've also got to look at the reality of most leaders don't really pause to say, what do we want our employee experience to be? What do we want our vendor experience to be? What do we want our customer experience to be? And deliberately pause and think about that, and then write it out and communicate it effectively, and then put the things in place for it. And that may sound odd to say, well, they don't really think about that. I'm looking at my reviews online. I'm looking at the surveys of my employees. Yeah, that's reactive. That's not being proactive. To take responsibility means you actually are proactive on the front end of saying, well, let's imagine what could be. And what would we truly love to have our employees experience, our customers experience, our vendors experience? And then how do we create that? And so it's not always, this something's broken, I now have the responsibility to fix it. Yes, you do, absolutely. But let's take a step back from that. Why don't we, before things are broken, even think about what could be and create an amazing environment, create an amazing experience for the individuals, the humans that are in the system with you, that are either working the system or they appreciate what the system creates for them.
Absolutely. It's so critical to be proactive on the front end. And if you start thinking about, where are the vulnerabilities in my business and my business model? How can I bulletproof it? How can I bulletproof any problems happening with my employees? And we're not talking about beating them into submission. We're talking about how are the communication systems? Do they feel free to come to you and tell you when there's a problem? And what do we have to improve? So there are a million different ways that you can keep improving your business, and you can keep, if you're not evaluating on a regular basis what can be improved here for the virtuous environment, for the protection of the business, for the protection of our customers, for the protection of our vendors, for the long-term success of the company. Obviously a lot of these retail stores that are going out of business and restaurants, I'm sure they thought of everything that they could possibly think of within their business model, and didn't have the scalability to change models that quickly. They didn't have the ability to change models that quickly. So there are going to come times when it's not going to work.
Right.
But there are going to be lots of times where you can see what the trends are. You can see things are going digital. You can predict that something might happen that really boosts the digital side of things. You may not know what it is, but you can predict that. You can predict, what if I had a fire? What would I be able to do? How would I move from this location to build a new location? How do I document all my systems so that I can move that? I mean, there are things that you can do that help to protect the company up front and to protect everybody involved. And at the same time, like you said, you have to be not only responsible, you're not only responsible on that side, but you're also, you're allowed to take the credit for it. You're allowed to reward yourself when things do go well. And sometimes, we always see CEOs that are taking these extravagant vacations, or they buy this big house, and people are looking at it and saying, well, that's a little over the top. And the only time that they do that is when they have not, they don't feel like the business owner has taken care of the company. They're doing it at the expense of the company, at the expense of the employees. But you do have the right to reward yourself, and you do have the right to take credit when things go well. But you need to share that credit.
Yeah,
You do,
absolutely.
you do need to be able to recognize when you haven't done it all alone, because chances are you haven't done it all alone. It may have been a decision that you made or an idea that you had, but you had to have people that would influence it and implement it.
And I think
So
one of the important things here is that, if we talk about this responsibility that we have for the outcomes and the effects, we got to recognize it starts with our emotional state, right? We may not be able to control, like, our emotions are triggered by what happens around us. That's a reality. What happens within us and around us. We have a responsibility for, number one, reacting. How do we respond to or react to those emotional states, right? And we have a responsibility to, in the long term, in the future, become more resilient so those emotional states don't affect our decision making in a negative way. So you've got the emotional state that we're responsible for. We're responsible for our mindset. How are we thinking about our business? How are we thinking about our employees and our customers? We're responsible for the mindset of all those people within our business, because we get to craft the culture of our business. We get to craft how they think. We get to put the mottos up on the wall if we do have an office environment that we're in. We get to put the mottos up on the computer screens if they're using a computer that we've given them. We can have those things pop up. We design that. Or it's default. And when it's default, we can't control it then. It gets out of our control. So we've got the emotions that we're responsible for. We've got our mindset we're responsible for. We are responsible for what's being said, the voice. So you were talking about that communication, but there's also an element of some of these companies that really have brilliant business owners and scale really in amazing ways. It doesn't mean they scale the fastest in the industry, but they scale in a sustainable way. They do some quite amazing things within their communities and all of that. These leaders are very recognize their responsibility for how people talk in their business and how people talk about their business.
right.
And I think that's such a key thing, that because communication is not just, how you communicate. Open door policy, that's very important, but it's also in what's being said. We can't do this. We can do this. Let me figure it out. I don't know the answer, but let me go find out for you. Like, are they willing? Are they going to lie to the customer when they don't know something? Or are they going to make something up? Or are they going to admit the truth that I don't know, but I will go find out? And then they actually do find out, right? So that's your voice. And then you've got your actions. What do you actually do? You're responsible for what you do and what your employees do, what your vendors do. And now some people might be saying, well, that's a whole lot to be responsible for. It is. It absolutely is. And that's why you see these business owners who, and I've seen so many CEOs and business owners during this time, during COVID here, who are just torn
You're
up.
frozen there.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay. Sorry about that. There's so many
breaking up.
Well, am I there? Well, I'll let you take the lead then for a moment.
Well, I agree 100%. You have to know what that culture is. You have to set that culture. You have to set the expectations. You have to set the language. You also are responsible for setting the mission of your company and the vision for the company, and making sure that everybody knows that and buys into it, and that there's a consistency. If your mission is this and everything you do is against that, then there's not only confusion, there's people feel like they've been misled and they don't trust you. Whereas if there's a consistency through the whole company with the messaging, with the actions and everything, then it's a different scenario completely, from the perspective of the customer, from the perspective of the employee, from the vendors, everybody that's involved. They see that you are driven toward one North Star, we call it, when you build your mission and your vision. Your mission should be your North Star. Every decision that I make, I look at the North Star and say, is this consistent in that sense? Is it in that light? Is it getting me closer to that? Is it getting me closer to my vision? And if you're doing things that are just haphazard, there's no planning behind it. It's just a whim, and 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 it's not consistent with that. Then you are going to be responsible for the fact that people are confused, that they are not understanding how they're supposed to react, how they're supposed to act, how they're supposed to talk. You do get the choice to set all of those things up front and set the culture and set the expectations. And when you do that and you model it, as opposed to just telling other people to do it, you're responsible for modeling that so that everybody else, I mean, they almost feel guilty if they're not doing doing it the way you set forth to do it, and you know that you explain to them and that you're modeling.
Yeah,
So
or on the other side, they feel proud that they're doing it the way that you've modeled it. You know, they
mhm.
feel like, hey, I'm part of something bigger than myself. It's meaningful to them. You know, and one of the other areas that you take responsibility for in your environment is the pace you set for the company. Now, this doesn't this can mean, you know, whether we work 30 hours a week or whether we work 80 hours a week. That's part of it. But even more so, it's like that pace of innovation, the pace of change, the pace of advancement moving forward. Is there an urgency in, hey, we want to help as many customers as possible? You know, is this I was reading or listening to one of Grant Cardone's books yesterday, Be Obsessed or Be Average. And there's one of the statements that he has in this book. Apparently, it's a motto that they have around. We're in a hurry to serve customers, and it got me thinking. I was like, okay, that's interesting. I would choose different language, but the essence of it there is get on the phone and help someone, right? You know, you're here to be helping customers. That's what you're here for. So get on the phone and help someone. And so I think the idea there is he's setting the pace. It's his business. He's setting the pace for his business. And, you know, when we look at, you know, Vinny, you and I are looking at, you know, the different things that businesses that we've got going on that we're building, we set the pace for how fast we're building those things. And it's not all about us. It's about the people that we bring in to help us. It's about the vendors we're working with. It's like, okay, we commit to these dates. This is when we're going to do something. Okay, so how do we get it done on that time? We don't want to do it faster than that necessarily, because we've got a whole lot of other stuff in the, you know, irons in the fire that we're moving forward. We've got to coordinate things, but how do we get it so it's done on time? We pick this date. It's not late. It's not early. It's on time. And then we've got to pace them. There's been cases where we've had conversations where, okay, we got to slow things down because they're getting out of control. You know, one piece is moving too fast, another piece isn't there, you know, but ready to hit the market with something, and we don't have the marketing content where it needs to be. We don't have a website where it needs to be. And those are all things that the CEO or the business owner, especially in a small business, has to be aware of. And eventually, as the business grows, they can have lieutenants, if you will, vice presidents or whatever else that are in charge of those things. But fundamentally, the CEO has to set the pace for the company. This is when we're going to get things done. This is how fast we're going to get there. And the CEO is looking at it, or should be looking at it, from this perspective of a portfolio. I've got all these projects on the plate. I'm not doing them, but I'm managing all of these projects. So maybe I want to slow the spend, the resourcing that's going to one project or one team down, so I can upscale it over here, and they move things back and forth. So they're thinking about it from a portfolio mindset, which, if you look within departments, typically they're not thinking that way. They're thinking about, hey, how do we get our projects done? And they think that they've got to get all of their stuff done fast, ahead of schedule, whatever else. But they don't see it from this broader 30,000-foot view that the CEO is looking at it from, and trying to organize and
Mhm.
affect in a positive way.
You're absolutely right. And I think that kind of leads us to the fact that we've talked about the 13 roles in the business, and the CEO is the one who's responsible for making sure that all of those roles are filled, whether they are doing it themselves to some extent, or they've got employees doing it, or they're outsourcing it. And also, not only are those roles filled and things are being done adequately in each of those departments, but that all the people, the people that are running those departments are coordinating with each other, because that comes down to the pace and the strategy behind it and everything. If your different departments, even if they're all you, are not talking to each other, not communicating, you're going to have a major problem. If sales doesn't know what marketing is doing and marketing doesn't know what customer experience is doing, you've got a problem. And so the CEO has to make sure that all those roles are being filled in an adequate way, and that there is a system that ties all of them together, so that whether it's a communication system, it's, we're going to have these team meetings. You're going to, when you're doing your finances, you're switching your hat and saying, I want to look at this from the sales perspective. I want to look at this from this perspective. If it's just you doing a couple of different roles, as the brilliant business owner, you are responsible for making sure that the system is running at 100% efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. So the finance part is critical, because if you don't have the cash flow to fund the advancing work that you're doing as a company, if your expenses are too high, we've talked about some of the things reacting to situations like suddenly there's a stoppage of sales, you've got to cut your expenses almost immediately. Do you have enough cash in your reserves to cover for a period of time? How do you make those decisions about what you're going to cut? I know there's a lot of CEOs, business owners out there who have cut their salary or are taking no salary right now so that they can keep their employees or some of their employees on. We're talking even large businesses, the restaurant that my wife works for, the chain, the executive team has cut their salaries, so that they can help keep people in the field, if you will, the managers and employees in the field working. So there's a lot of things like that. And I think that leads into kind of this other area of you taking care of your employees. So if you're taking care of the finances of your business, you've also got to take care of your employees and make sure that they're well cared for. And that could mean the benefits package. It could mean, we talked a little bit about the hours of work, but it also means, really getting in and making sure that their families are well taken care of, right? It's making sure that they have the ability to, or they don't have fear that their families aren't going to be cared for, right? And I'm thinking, as an example, and again, I'm just using COVID as an example because it's here now and people are dealing with this in the moment. A lot of companies and a lot of CEOs and business owners are really concerned because they understand, okay, we've got school starting, right? It's for some people, school started last week. And so you've got employees who have kids that are either going to a classroom and are hesitant because they're not sure what's going to happen, or they've got kids that are at home and doing, online from home. And my internet got unstable just a few moments ago, right? That's in part due to the number of people in my neighborhood, even though I've got a high-speed connection, the number of people in my neighborhood that have started to use the internet again for school. That's the reality of it. And so there's going to be these types of interruptions, so how do businesses handle that, from a customer experience perspective, from an employee engagement perspective? If the internet goes out in my home, what am I going to do? I've got to worry about my kids not getting to school or doing schoolwork. I've got to worry about me not being able to get into the office. So there's all these elements of taking care of your employees, the benefits, the experience of the day, that they have the tools that they can make the decisions that you've empowered them to make, or you've made them at least accountable for. You've got to make sure that they're empowered to make those decisions and to do what needs to be done.
It's such a critical role that the CEO takes. It can't be passive. It has to be very, very assertive in many ways. I think one of the things that we need to talk about are some of the really specific situations where a CEO needs to be able to make the hard decisions, like when somebody has to be fired. That's not an easy thing to do. I worked for, I was in a nonprofit, and the executive director just didn't have the heart to fire people. I was the assistant, and I was the one that had to do the firing. And I loved her, and I had a lot of respect for her, but that was one thing that was really tough for me. She made the decision that the person had to go, but I had to be the one to do that. So, and yes, sometimes you're going to have a personnel department, or the executive that's in charge of that department, they're going to do the firing. And I'm just using this as an example, but sometimes we let our emotions get in the way, and we don't have the heart to do something that needs to be done. It's a very critical decision, like spending money on something, even though it may be just because it's protective, it's risk management, but you're going to go ahead and spend the money on that rather than do something that you would really like. Uh, Sometimes it's uh, disciplining somebody. Some of us just don't get along, don't feel comfortable disciplining somebody, or even just telling them that they're doing something wrong. There's a lot of little things like that that we talked about the culture, and if one person is disrupting the culture, that is the one bad apple, and that can ruin the entire barrel.
Well,
um,
another couple examples. This comes outside the company, but they have, I think, equal and sometimes even greater impact because it does impact the environment. Is knowing when to fire a client, knowing when a customer is just the wrong customer, and they're damaging the organization, they're damaging the morale of the employees, they're abusing your employees. And let's be honest, there are a lot of customers out there who abuse employees, and the CEOs and the leaders in those organizations that allow that behavior to happen are being irresponsible. They have to take responsibility. The customer is not always right. Or maybe this is better stated. Not every customer is right for you and for your business. But there are situations that I have seen where it's not just about a person getting angry because they didn't get what they were promised. I mean, that's perfectly legitimate thing to have happen. But to abuse the person, verbally or otherwise, that's trying to serve you and trying to help you solve a problem, that's unacceptable. And any leader that allows that to happen is being irresponsible. So they've got to take the responsibility to exit that customer from their business, whether it means physically exiting that customer by, there's the door, sir or ma'am, you are no longer welcome here. That has to happen. Or in other cases, there are sometimes where clients, I've got some B2B clients in that, and one of them was recently telling the story about how after they've been working with this client for a while, but they kind of realized that it wasn't the right fit for their organization. So they eventually began to transition that client out. And after it was over, they did it in a very uplifting way. But after the transition was over, or toward the end of it, the client came to them and said, you know what, about 6 months ago, we realized that there was this emotional disconnect. And so we realized that it was good for us to start transitioning as well. So a lot of times if you have a bad, a kind of an adversarial or a disconnected, client, it's probably because they also recognize that something's not quite the right fit there. They're not getting the promises met the way they want them to be met, or they have expectations that they haven't expressed, or they have expectations that you can't possibly meet. And so it's up to the CEO a lot of times to come in and have those conversations, or maybe you're talking at a local level, it could be the general manager, the leader at that level has got to be able to come up and take the responsibility to exit those customers. Another example that I've seen happen, and it's a challenging one too, is like, you maybe have a product that you're trying to launch, or a marketing campaign that you're trying to really move forward, and all indicators were that this was the right project, this is the right way to go about it, and it's just not working. And the CEO or business owner is given plenty of latitude for them to try new things. There's a point at which they have to say, you know what, we're going to call this one, this one's coming off the plate. We're no longer going to continue to invest in that. And that's challenging because people have contributed their life force, their creativity, their passion to building these things. And now the CEO, the business owner, has got to find a way to say, hey, I appreciate what you've done. It's just not working for some reason. And we've gone through all the options, so let's move on to something else. And that can be a very challenging situation. There can be conflict involved with that. There can be people that just feel this grief because what they've poured themselves into is lost. It's very much this relationship they have. So I think there is, beyond firing and doing those types of things, there's some real decisions that have to be made around the direction of the business and what to do with it.
I agree 100%. It very much comes down to your emotional state, your emotional stability, and your emotional resilience, and your ability to be objective in situations and seeing, what something really looks like. And it's not always going to be easy. If it's always easy, then something is wrong, because you're not prepared for when there is real adversity. And I don't know if there's any school and any way to train yourself on the emotional stability other than to have. I mean, there are places where you can go and get training on. I didn't mean that there's no way to do that, but it's not something they teach in school. It's not something that they teach at a university level or anything like that, where it's, for the business owner, this is how you deal with these problems and this is how you react. And it's not. So it is something that you can get coaching for. It is something that there are amazing consultants out there that can help. But it's also something that you can lean on your advisory board for. How do I make this decision? Is this the right decision? I mean, you don't have to, just because you're responsible doesn't mean you have to make every decision yourself. But you are the final say. You have to get all the input. You have to allow everybody to have their say in the matter, anybody who's being affected by it. And sometimes people who are not being affected by it because they're looking at it from a totally different perspective. They're looking at it as an outsider and saying, this is what I see. So it's and that goes all the way down to, do I fire this employee? Or, the flip side of that is, who do I hire? Do I hire my cousin who's begging me for a job, or do I hire the person who's more experienced and better for that role? Those kind of decisions are, they seem really small. They seem, something to laugh at, but it happens every day and it ruins businesses every day. It's not, it's the CEO who's going to be successful, the business owner who's going to be the brilliant business owner, is the one who recognizes when their view is not enough and they need to get some outside help. It's the one who recognizes that they need to have input from all the people that are involved, and making it a joint decision quite often makes it a whole lot easier. You may know what the decision is, but you have to lead people into that decision. The people who can look at their business from the 30,000-foot view and from the very close view, right inside the business and see what's happening. The people who set the culture from the vision standpoint, and then all the way down to modeling it on a daily basis. These are the business owners that are going to turn out to be brilliant business owners, because the employees that they have are going to help the business grow. They're going to want to see it succeed. It's not just about their own paycheck anymore. They respect you. They want to see you succeed. They respect what the business stands for. They want to see that grow. They respect what you're doing for the community, what you're doing for the employees and the employees' families. They respect what you're doing for your customers, and they want to be part of that. People want to be part of something great. And when you set the culture that says we are going to be great, and you actually do it, it's one thing to say we're gonna have a great company. Yeah, that's fine. But when you actually do it, and you put that into place, and it's done in a way where it's a win-win for everybody, it's a virtuous environment, people will come out of the woodwork to help you succeed.
And I think there's, switching gears a little bit here, because I think we've already been drifting into that area, looking at success as an example. You have the responsibility as a CEO and business owner fundamentally to set the goals and to approve the goals set by those that are working for you, and then also to decide how they're going to be measured. And it's one thing to set a goal out there, as an example. Maybe it's in your marketing. Well, we're going to have X number of content pieces created every month. maybe 2, 4, 6 content pieces created every month, a post a day on LinkedIn, a post a day here, whatever else, right? There's that level of granularity that the marketing team would be responsible for, the person marketing for you would be responsible for. And that's great. And that's a goal. But then, you've got to go beyond that and say, okay, well, we can measure how many of those are being created, but it's not just about the number. It's about the effect they're having, the outcomes we're having with it. So that we talked before about, you have the responsibility for the outcomes and the effects. And so if you've got, let's say, 4 content marketing pieces that your marketing agency is creating for you, or your marketing team internally is creating for you, but it's not generating leads, well, what's the point? You're spending money without generating the leads that you need, right? And so you have to be aware of those things. You have to be looking not just at the goals that you set, but you have to be looking at the measures of why you set those goals, and how you're measuring to make sure that you're doing it the right way. And that's something that a lot of CEOs and business owners are not necessarily trained to do in particular areas of their business. There's a number. I don't remember the number offhand. I should have looked this up before we got into the conversation, but the number of business owners who don't know how to read their profit and loss statements, that don't know how to understand if they're actually profitable or not. And it's a challenge for them, because if you can't understand your profit and loss statement, your cash flows, things like that, then how are you going to run your business? You could be upside down very quickly. And then so you take that and expound even further, how are they going to know the right number of posts, or the right number of content pieces, or the outcomes of those content pieces, or what your sales conversion rate should be? If your click-through rate is X, how many sales should you be making, and what's your average sale? There's a lot of metrics that are required to run a business well, and they're required at those deeper tactical levels, but they build up to the strategy of the organization as a whole. And so if you don't understand those, you've got to have someone in your organization who can help teach you about those numbers. Because as the business owner and CEO, you may not understand how you get there. You may not understand every single metric, but you have a responsibility to know enough to know if you're on track or off track, if what's happening is the right thing or it's not the right thing, because you want to be able to step in and say, hey, you've gone down this path and it doesn't look like it's achieving the results that we thought it would. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to hit our goals. A lot of times your team, as you said before, Vinny, your team may not be willing to come forward if you have that culture of, penalizing them for everything that they do wrong and not supporting them. And at the same time, your team may just not be aware that, we've gone long enough. They may be saying, oh, just one more time, because they're so emotionally engaged and connected to what they're doing. They want to try throwing more after a failing project. And so as the owner and as a CEO, you've got to be able to step in and say, I think we've taken that far enough. So you've got to understand the measures. You've got to first you got to create the goals, understand the measures that tell you whether you're on track or off track, and then understand how people are actually getting to those measures. One of the things I've seen in a lot of businesses, and a lot of times when I come into a business, this is one of the first things I start getting into is, okay, how are you measuring the business? And how are you getting the data that creates those measures? And it's astounding sometimes how bad the data is that they're making decisions on. And I can see why they're having trouble in their business. And so we've got to go fix the data collection process before we can actually have the right numbers to even know if the goal is the right goal or not.
You get into it a lot deeper than I've ever gotten into it in my businesses, to be honest with you, because I remember the time when Connie and I, my wife Connie, she pays our bills. And we were sitting down and we were looking at the profit and loss for the first time. And it's like, I thought we were doing really well for the business. And she said, but we're paying this and this and this and this. And I had no idea that what we were bringing in was not adequate enough to cover everything and pay her a salary and pay me a salary and everything. So you're absolutely right. If you don't understand at least the basics of it, enough to know accurately whether you're making money, whether you can invest money, where you need to invest the money, whether you need to I mean, a lot of times we let creditors just go on and on and on, whether we need to go after the creditors. We have to be a little bit more aggressive over here. We have to be less aggressive over here. I mean, all those kind of things, somebody has to be in control of those. And maybe somebody else is doing it. You have an accountant who's doing that, but you're at least meeting with them and getting a report on where you stand with your bookkeeper and your accountant. You're getting a report on where you stand and what needs to be changed. What area of my business is spending all the money? Is marketing, are we putting way too much money in marketing for what the return is? Are we putting way too much money into operations, into machinery and all this newfangled stuff, but we're not seeing a return on it at the end? And you have to know, you have to have that at least the working knowledge, excuse me, of your business's expenses, income, and profit. And that it runs the gamut to, when you're talking about data, it is marketing data and sales data, and it is operational data, and are we putting out enough units and this and that, and there can be so much to know that a CEO can't learn everything. If it's not something that, if you're not good at math and numbers and data, then that's not going to be something that you want to be in charge of, and you don't want to spend hours and hours and hours on it. But somebody has to be in charge of that and give you an accurate report, and you have to accept the report as accurate.
And you have to try to learn what you can. You may not be able to say, I'm never going to run the numbers myself, but I need to know that we're doing it correctly. Because that's,
Right.
If you go back to a lot of the financial scandals, I'm thinking like really big companies now, but even small companies, where there's the accountant has embezzled or something like that, or the general manager's embezzled. It often comes down to that the person above them kind of abdicated responsibility and said, okay, you handle this. And like, it's not on my plate anymore. But that's not the way. You can't do that to run a business. One of my mentors actually went through that situation, and the business collapsed. Actually, multiple businesses collapsed as a result of what was going on. And she took her responsibility and did what needed to be done and that. But it was interesting because she kind of abdicated responsibility for these things, and the businesses operated for a while, and then all of a sudden everything crashed down on top. And so another piece to this, I think, which is important to recognize, and like in my business at one point, having a very, very good year, and I'm looking at I'm watching the numbers, or so I thought I was, but it ended up that in reality we had invested in multiple new product development, because we had the capital to do research and development and things like that. So we'd gone on a path of multiple investments on research and the next line of products and offerings that we were going to have. At the same time, we had our pipeline slow down, but I didn't notice it fast enough. And on top of that, we had the payments from our clients. Overall, the payment time frame, let's say it's a 15-day net or 30-day net, whatever else, I hadn't paid close enough attention. The average was getting much longer. And so there were all these markers in the business, and I'm an analytical person, all these markers in the business, but I wasn't paying close enough attention to all of them, sitting down and saying, okay, let's look at all the markers together. Because if I had, I would have seen, okay, we've made investments over here in stuff that we're not getting a return on, and the timeline is getting longer and longer and longer and longer. And so that money is out the door without a return. We've got limited number of sales coming in comparison to what our projections were. We've got, we're not getting cash coming in the door for the work we've already done. And so the perfect storm, and you end up in a cash flow bind. More has flowed out than has flowed in. And I still got to pay my bills. And so that was a moment, like a wake up moment for me. And I really had to, it took a while, but I had to kind of rethink how I looked at the measures in my business to make sure that what I was doing was the right thing. And it didn't solve any of the problems that led to that situation, but just being able to understand the numbers then gave me a way to look at my business differently. And immediately I start trimming off those extra investments that I didn't need to, talk to my vendors and say, okay, you know what, we're not moving forward on this. We're pausing on this right here, because I had to stop the flow out of cash where I could. And then I had to go turn around and figure, okay, what are we going to sell? How do we get more stuff in the pipeline? And so a lot of things that were on the table before, we just paused those. Some of them we never went back to. We just basically, maybe someday we'll go back to those and dust them off and bring them back out. But the likelihood is that we won't. And so it's money that in a sense was lost, or maybe you say it was invested in a learning opportunity, learning how not to run my business, from that perspective. So I think every business owner is going to run into those challenges. It's seldom that you have a business owner who doesn't have those challenges as they're scaling. And oftentimes they may show up in the good times, but they definitely show up in the hard times. And so if you're one of those business owners, it's not something to feel guilty about. It's not something to get to beat yourself up about. It's just a reality of you probably did the best you knew how to do. And you probably, as you were saying earlier, Vinny, a lot of this stuff is not trained in schools. A lot of us, that have gone into business, we've had to learn on the fly. Even I've got an MBA, but my MBA, my master's in business, did not teach me how to be an entrepreneur. It taught me how to be a good mid-level manager or VP in a large corporation. That's what it taught me. That's not what I'm doing. I'm doing a very different role. And so there really isn't a school for CEOs or business owners, which is honestly, this is why we started LeaderBridge so many years ago and why we teach this content, because we realize that CEOs and business owners don't have a place to go to really get that education. There's some places they can go, like organizations like CEO Space that we're both a part of. But even that, there's more opportunity out there than even they can serve, because they focus on specific types of companies in specific scenarios. So all that being said, I think it's important for us to look at and understand. We've talked a lot about culture. We've talked a lot about the last several minutes about measures and goals, but taking responsibility goes beyond that even, and I think, the risk, managing company risk is another area that we've really got to touch on here over the next few minutes.
Yeah, and risk management is one of the hardest decisions sometimes that people have to invest in. And as a CEO or as a business owner, you are responsible for all of it. And a lot of times it feels like it's money out the door. Mm-hmm. You are paying for insurance. You're having lawyers draw up your agreements. So you're getting legal advice when you need to have it. You are investing in safety equipment that is not, doesn't have a direct return. You can't see a return on it, but you have to do it. Maintenance on stuff. I mean, there's so many different things that come under risk management that seem like they are just, all they are is expenses. But when one thing goes wrong, if you don't have insurance, then you lose a whole lot more than what you ever invested in the risk management. And so that's a big area that the CEO has to be aware of, all of the ways that the business is vulnerable, and put the pieces in place that are going to protect it, and and be able. The idea of being able to be resilient and bounce back from things, a lot of it has to do with, we had a fire, but I had insurance. Okay, so I can replace the building. That's not a problem. That's a form of resilience that seems like a no-brainer, but how many people don't spend the money on that, or on liability insurance, or on all the little things that need to be in place to totally feel like you are protected, and you are, your business is as secure as it can possibly be. Setting up an LLC, not wanting to spend the money to do that, to give you that layer of protection. Things like that are really, they can get ugly, and no one is to blame except for the CEO in that situation if those things aren't being taken care of.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking here about a particular situation that I ran into probably 5 or so years ago, where it was a legal challenge, and it very much falls in this risk category. And I mean, there was this burden on me. Like I felt like, you know, what in the world? I've got this legal challenge in front of me. It could destroy my business. Um, and I didn't know how to handle it. So I went to a mentor of mine who I know had been through some pretty significant legal challenges on their own in their businesses in their past. And so I went to her and I talked with her about it. And she's like, okay, have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? Went through a list of things. And I'm like, yes, I've done all those things. You know, I've gotten all this in place. It's like, do you believe you've been honest with everyone from the start with everything you've done? And I said, yes, I've been honest. I've been transparent. You know, I believe I'm in the right here. I believe that my contract, you know, covers this situation. And then she said something that I will never forget. And I've given this advice to other people as a result of this. She said, then hire the legal professionals, meet with them on a weekly basis, like have a 30-minute meeting a week or something like that, whatever it is, but let them do their job. Keep focusing on growing your business. And so a part of this risk management is really, and this is where I find up until this moment where I actually had to deal with this, and it took me a while to actually be able to do, like I hired the legal professionals, but to really set it aside and go focus on growing my business was it took me a lot of emotional growth, a lot of mindset growth, a lot of determination and perseverance. And I share that because when I went through this particular challenge, I was burdened in a way that I was afraid I was going to lose my business. I was going to, you know, like my family was going to suffer, the mortgage, the schools, the kids' school tuition, all of it. You know, what are we going to lose if I lose the business? And how am I going to recover from this? I mean, my mind was in a state of like, oh my God, this is the end of the world situation. And so that was all going through my head. But when she gave me this where she says, hire the legal professionals, meet with them 30 minutes a week or whatever that time frame is. Other than that, take your mind off of it and go grow your business. And when I finally embraced that I had a 30-minute meeting with them every week, and that I was supposed to spend the other whatever 50 hours of the week growing my business, it changed everything. And that it didn't remove the responsibility, but for what was going on, but it removed the responsibility of worrying about what was going on, because the legal professionals are experts and they could craft and they could respond as they needed to. And the situation ended up being resolved pretty much 100% in my favor. It's probably 95% in my favor. Right. And so had I chosen to, I could have worried for 6 or 8 or 10 months on that while the legal professionals are doing what they need to do. So fast forward 2 years ago, a related challenge. It was not the same people, not the same situation, but a related challenge, another legal challenge began to rear its head. And I was working with a business partner on something, and I remembered this advice: hire the legal professionals, meet with them on a regular basis, and then go out there and let them do their job, and you go grow your business. And I basically told that same message to my business partner on this. I said, our job is to hire the legal professionals and then go out there and do what we want to do. And it was interesting because for me, it was like, I've been here before. I know what this is like. For my business partner, they had never been here before. And so for them, it was like me when I went through it the first time. And it was, I was the guide, which was awesome. You know, I was able to help them through it. And what ended up happening is that legal thing just vanished. It just went away because the legal professionals that we hired were like, there is not an issue here. Go do this, X, Y, and Z. They basically gave us the same advice. Go grow your business as fast as you can right now and get this stuff done. Because the challenge, if you do not move fast, this challenge could snowball into something else. And so we did that, and we never had another issue with the challenge. So I say that because risk mitigation, kind of tell those stories. The risk mitigation is not just about having the insurance and things like that. It's also about knowing the right experts to hire, and then to stop thinking about and worrying about it, except when you have an appointment on your calendar to do so.
I love that. I love that advice. I want to switch gears here a little bit if we can, because this leads right into it. Your mental state, your physical state, you are responsible for making sure that you can show up. You do show up when you need to show up, when you're supposed to be there. So that means protecting yourself, your health, your well-being, your growth, your family time, your work-life balance, all of those things. You have to be responsible for maintaining those so that you are there for your business, so that you can make decisions not based on, well, I don't know if I'm going to be well enough to do that next week. You are basing your decisions on the fact that you have protected yourself, that you've taken care of yourself, that obviously things are going to happen that you can't predict, but you can take every precaution, and you can make sure that you are healthy, that the people around you are healthy, that, those are not, because, if you're doing a SWOT analysis, one of the things, SWOT, if you're not familiar with it, is listing out your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And people have a lot more threats in their business and in their lives than they really think about. When I have somebody do a SWOT analysis, I have them list out their personal threats as well as their business threats. And that it usually is some kind of a health problem, is some kind of a family problem. It's so critical that you are on your game 100% when you're in your business. And that's from a health perspective, from a mental perspective, that's from an awareness perspective, it's from having a clear mind, it's from an attitude perspective. Excuse me. You are responsible for taking care of all of those so that you can be 100% for your business.
Yeah, and a shameless plug here for a moment. The whole mental side of things, this is something that you and I have long talked about. We've done some training in this area. Well, it's also part of the reason I partnered up with Dave Austin, who does mental performance coaching for professional athletes, for Olympians and that. And we actually created a program for business leaders and people in business. And we call it Beast Triggers for Business. And I won't go into the program here, but if you want more information, go ahead and comment here or follow up with me afterwards. But it's all designed around building that emotional resilience and mental focus so that you're not being distracted by these things when you're in business, when you're in your meetings, when you're trying to make things happen. And so there are ways to do this, but again, it's not something you're going to learn in the traditional classroom. So I'll take a few moments here, Vinny, and I think there's an element. Let's talk about what you're not responsible for. And there's two big categories here. So I'll put the categories out there and we can talk into them. You're not responsible for doing all of the work of the 13 roles in your business. And you're also not responsible for how people feel. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize. And by how people feel, that can mean how your employees feel. It can also mean how your customers feel. So let's dive into these two elements of what you're not responsible for as the CEO or business owner.
Well, we started talking about the first one. You're not responsible for doing every single role because there's not enough hours in the day, no matter how many hours a day that you're gonna work. There's no way you can do it all, especially as a business grows. But you are responsible for making sure that those roles are filled, that somebody is taking care of the marketing, the sales, the operations, the strategy. There are certain things that only you can do, and that is like setting the mission. That's your role. But you have to step into the guardian role, and that is guarding the business and making sure that all these roles are being taken care of, and that, again, they are communicating with each other. They are working together like a well-oiled machine, as opposed to fighting against each other or working so independently that one does not have any clue what the other is doing. And a lot of business owners either neglect some of the roles because they're just not good at it, or they don't even know it exists. They don't even think about risk management, for instance, or HR and personal policies and stuff like that. But they are part of the roles. Somebody has to do that. But a lot of business owners only concentrate on the things that they do best, and they just, whether they ignore or just hate doing something, hate doing the book so much that they just put it off, or they just are not knowledgeable about it. and they don't realize that it needs to be done, there is it is a deciding factor in the success of the business and the long-term success of the business, the growth of the business. If you want to be a brilliant business owner, we laid out 5 different areas that that exemplify a brilliant business owner, and one of them is that there is stability, and that down the road there's a way that it can pay for itself. It can operate without you. It's something that you can sell. It's something that's going to benefit your family. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that that can work. But the bottom line is, if you don't have all these roles covered, then there's going to be a bottleneck, a very, very bad bottleneck when it comes time to do something on a larger scale. And so I think it's for the first thing is that it's critical to know all the roles, be aware of them all, and then be able to figure out how every single role is going to be taken care of, and how they relate to each other, and how they're going to be able to communicate with each other.
Well said, very well said. I think so I'll jump into the other one. And the second was, what you're not responsible for is how people feel. Now, let me be very clear about that. You have to invest the time and put in the mental effort to say, what do we really want people to experience? Employees, vendors, customers, et cetera, right? And then creating the environment so that can happen. But fundamentally, you are not responsible if you have that environment in place and you've created this thing. If someone comes into that environment and they don't like it, that's not your responsibility. They may not be the right customer, the right employee, the right vendor for you. And another piece to this is sometimes that also means people that are close to you. Could mean your family, your friends. A lot of times family and friends they feel uncomfortable when you're growing your business, especially if you're a small business owner or you're just getting a start out. And they are going to be naysayers, or they're going to be doubters. They're going to be there to try to protect you a lot of times, is what it comes down to. So they feel uncomfortable because this is what it comes down to. When people are doubting or naysayers, it's typically because they feel as if they were in your situation, they would never be able to handle this. Or they're doubting you because they've doubted themselves. What they're doing is projecting their own situation, their own mindset, their own emotional state onto you, and they're fearing for you. And so when we talk about you're not responsible how people feel, we're making the assumption you've listened to everything we've said before. This is about creating the virtuous culture, et cetera, et cetera. If people come into that and they're projecting their own emotional state onto you, then that's not your responsibility. That's their own stuff that they have to deal with. And it's interesting because, from the role I play in customer experience world, employee experience world, it gets challenging sometimes to have this conversation with CEOs and with business owners, because they oftentimes really care very deeply about their employees and about their customers. But if they don't understand what is their responsibility in the feeling area and what is not their responsibility, they hold on to bad employees for too long. And I don't want to call them bad employees, not necessarily bad. It could be someone who doesn't fit, right? They hold on to the wrong customers for too long. They hold on to the wrong vendors for too long, right? As you said, maybe they hired their cousin, their brother, their sister, some relative. So the problem with that is, if you start to try to feel responsible for other people's feelings and that are outside of the environment that you've created and the intention you have, then you take on a whole series of burdens that you cannot be successful with, because they're going to hold you back and they're going to hold you down. So you've got to let those things go and recognize that in this business, I am trying to create this type of environment. This is what I am focused on. This is my mission, my purpose. This is my why. And not everyone's going to agree with that. And that's okay. There are going to be haters out there. There are going to be people who are naysayers out there. You're not there to please everyone. You're there to live out your potential and your purpose through the business, and to help those who join you in the business to do the same thing.
Well said. Well said, because it's so, there are people who feel like they have to please everybody. And it is absolutely impossible. Absolutely impossible. I think every business should have a sign um, on the door that says, "We are not baggage carriers," because you're not there to carry your customer's baggage. That's not part of what you're there for. You are there to set up an environment that if they buy into it, they will have the experience that you want them to have. As an artist consultant working with musicians, and I've mentioned this before, I always tell my clients that they are responsible for, in the most part, for when somebody from the audience leaves at the end of the show. Usually the first thing they do is get on social media and talk about what that show was like. What was their experience? Just went to the greatest show. That's what you want them to say. They're not going to say that if you don't set them up to say that. So if you're not setting your customers up to have a great experience, then you can't expect it. But if you are setting them up to have a great experience, then you're going to have that large percentage of people who understand that, who see that, and who love that, and they appreciate that. But you will always have the ones who are going to have a bad day no matter what, and they've got to make somebody else's life miserable. And you have to be responsible enough to be able to say, that is not my customer. I'm sorry. I think you need to go someplace else.
Yeah. And there's a level of when you take that responsibility for your business, for your mission, for the potential of yourself, your employees, and your customers who really the business is designed to serve, when you take on that responsibility, you actually have to relieve yourself of the responsibility for how the others, the haters, the naysayers, how they feel, because those two things cannot coexist at the same time. You can't be responsible for both. Your business will fail if you try.
I agree 100%. I've been there. I've tried to please everybody. And I mean, I remember I've only had to fire one client, but I did. And I never felt so relieved in my life, because the stress level of trying to deal with that one client was affecting every single other client.
Yep.
And it broke my heart to have to do it, but it was the best thing. When somebody makes two of your interns cry because of how mean they are, how mean they were to them, that's not my customer. That's not my client. I don't care how much you're paying me. It's not worth my culture. You're ruining my culture, the culture that I'm trying to establish. And so, you have to be able to cut ties. And it is vendors. It could be a customer. It could be an employee, like you said. It could be a manager that you bring in. It could be an advisor that you have. It's always poo-pooing everything that you say, and nothing is going to be right, and diminishing your ability to make the right decisions, and not empowering you to make decisions. There are going to be family members that you have to distance yourself from because they're naysayers. You have to be able to distance yourself from naysayers, no matter who they are. And if you're going to have the confidence to move forward, if you're not going to be constantly doubting yourself, you have to move away from that. You have to surround yourself with the people who love what you do, love you, respect you, and that includes your customers. And when you have a business that is humming along because all your customers are experiencing exactly what they came to experience, they know what they want. I mean, let's face it, we all love certain restaurants because we love the experience we get there. And another restaurant may have much better food, what people would consider a better environment, but we love the experience that we get here. There's one thing. It could be, we love this server. We love this one meal. We love this view. We love that it's close. It doesn't matter what it is. But, there are going to be people who absolutely love that, and there are going to be people who just absolutely hate it for the same reason that you love it. I love being in a crowded place. I hate being in a crowded place. I love my, really big plates. I hate having a really big plate. I feel like I'm wasting food. I mean, there's no way you can please everybody. So establish the culture with your employees, with your customers, with your marketing, your branding, everything. Establish the culture that you want everyone to experience, and then deliver it 110%. And you will find yourself surrounded by people who absolutely love what you do and will fight to keep you going. They will fight to help you if there's an adversity. They will defend you if there's a problem. They will support you when things are tough. I mean, there are restaurants that people are going to just to keep them in business. They'll buy from them, and buy right now, to go just to keep them in business
Right.
because they want them to be there. That's the kind of support that you will get if you are treating everybody. You're creating that virtuous environment, and you're creating a culture of loyalty and meeting expectations. And I mean, not everybody's going to get to the level of the culture that Harley has developed around their brands and everything. But you will have your core customers. You will have your core group that are loyal to you, and no business can ask for more than to have those loyal fans, those loyal customers that are there for them in the good and in the bad. And it's all because the CEO set it up to be that way.
Yep, the CEO took responsibility for the outcomes and the effects of the system, and
Great idea.
that's exactly that is principle number 5 that the brilliant business owner uses to guide their business toward success and significance. So this concludes this show. Next week we are going to talk about principle 6, which is I create and follow a sequenced strategy. And you might be saying, wow, you've got 9 principles and you're just now getting to strategy at number 6. That's right, folks. There's a whole lot that has to go on up here and in here before you ever get to creating your strategy. So I hope you've enjoyed this show. If you've got questions, post them out here. Reach out to Vinny and myself. We are available. You can also check out our book, Leverage, at leaderbridge.net/leverage, or on Amazon. It's also available there. It's a Kindle on Kindle version. And if you have any questions for us, if you want us to take a look at your business, help you out with your business, reach out to us. Let us know. Message us here on LinkedIn, or here on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, or reach out to us via email. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, have an amazing day.
Adios.